problem with that is that's the only way to get good at something, is to do hard things and to do things while they're boring, because that's essentially what repetition is.
Welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. Today we are talking about something that we had a long conversation about last week around the sort of quitter's mindset that we see and how quitting once can become a habit, and what parents, coaches and athletes themselves can actually do about it. Then we'll finish on a bit more of a positive note and dive into how athletic training builds the traits that matter most in life, the traits that set young people up, not just for sport, but for adulthood. So if we get stuck into it, I know when we were talking last week, you said something that really resonated with me, and that was that, that quitting once becomes a habit. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think most people, what they don't realise is that a lot of people won't use the word quit, but I think it's sort of sits in that realm. So they won't say it, but and that's because they'll find a way to justify it. And I think the really common way is things like, we'll try something new. So whether that's a new sport, new hobby, a new interest, or a new version of what there is. And the common one in our region is they'll jump around from gym to gym, thinking that that's the solution. Telling themselves that, something new or different will be better. And I think the reason why they jump around is so that people don't have to sit with the uncomfortable truth that the real reason they left is because it is uncomfortable. Because it's probably hard, maybe it gets a bit boring. But the problem with that is that's the only way to get good at something, is to do hard things and to do things while they're boring. Because that's essentially what repetition is. So this isn't just kids, we're talking about adults as well, which is probably where kids get it from, which is why this is important, directed even at the parents. We need to be aware of the example we set as adults and the kids around us, and obviously parents with the kids that are directly under us. So I think we disguise it by packaging it as something positive, so we can convince ourselves that this new thing will be better, so that we don't have to finish the hard thing that's directly in front of us. But the pattern is still the same. Once you quit once and the brain learns that escape becomes easier than actually following something through. And then that mindset becomes infectious and starts to repeat everywhere.
So why is it so common now, especially in young athletes who could be, if it's quitting gym, quitting their sport, whatever it is, why is it so common?
I think number one, the power kids have. So I think now kids have more say than ever in their decisions, particularly what used to belong to parents. And I get why. We want our kids to be happy, but happiness, I think, comes from doing the hard thing, not before it. Number two, I think parents struggle, especially in our case, things like the early mornings, lots of extra travel, other commitments, with other kids as well as just the one kid. So sometimes quitting doesn't come from the kid. It's probably the parent not wanting to do the hard things either. So I think we want to be really, as we said, aware of that because of the message that sends. And that probably links to exactly the third point there is exposure. I think kids today are not exposed to enough discomfort long enough to develop the mental capacity to stay in something when it gets tough. We always go back to things like the social media, and everything is so much about short attention that we're not seeing things through long enough to actually understand what hard work and what getting uncomfortable and working through something is all about. As a result, what happens is the first time something gets uncomfortable, they rationalize a new option. But as a result, the problem never really gets solved, and their habit just gets reinforced.
And so usually a lot of the time we only enjoy the things that we're good at. So when you're mentioning people probably don't enjoy the uncomfortable because it's probably linked to that they're not very good at it. So that's where people, even when they're playing multiple sports, they tend to pick the one that they're best at because that's the one they sort of enjoy the most because they're good at it. So how can that sort of link to quitting as well?
Well, I can't remember who it was. I saw was it either an NFL coach, an NBA coach, saying that why he loved the multi-sport athletes. In fact, it wasn't about the skill development. He was talking about a mindset because he knows if they play multiple sports, they're probably playing things they're not good at. Because if you're an NBA player, you're probably really good at basketball. But if you did a few other sports, then you're probably more likely to find something that you can't just dominate as easily because your main sport's obviously basketball. So yeah, I think it links into that. To your question, I think at the start you're not really good at anything because you're learning. That's the whole point. And the problem though is learning feels uncomfortable. You don't really get good at something until you've done it enough, and you won't enjoy something until you get good at it. So you've got to be willing to suffer a bit in order to get good. So as a result, if you're an athlete that jumps around every time something gets hard, you never actually reach the stage where you really truly enjoy something because you never really truly got good at something. The problem that also links to is obviously if you're avoiding the difficult stuff, you're avoiding where the growth happens. And then, as we said, that becomes a pattern not just in sport, but it's going to be study, relationships, money, everything else you do down the road.
So I was sort of thinking about some ads that we're going to be sort of launching in the coming days, and I was sort of thinking about some of the sessions that were done with Darcy, and I asked you, I think it was yesterday or the day before, around why you think he gets results that others don't, and we've obviously talked about how he sort of improved his speed over those 5 sessions with you. Can you share what you said, because it sort of fits here?
I think the big thing with Darcy is he loves training, and he loves training because it's focused on what he needs to get better at, and that's the difference. Like we said, I think a lot of athletes love what they're good at naturally, so they're just happy to do more of that. He is more about what don't I do well? Like, I just want to get better at that, which means there's a lot of training that is actually really hard for him, and he's got to really lock in, and he's got to do that repeatedly over and over and over to get better. So it's not easy. I would think, with 99.9% confidence, that the thought of avoiding or quitting for him would not even enter his mind. Like, it's just not even part of it. Whereas I think, we've got kids that watch the clock, how long to go. Like, they're trying to quit on themselves almost every minute. I don't know if Darcy's ever had that thought. And it's to the point that if he wasn't even an AFL player, I don't think his routine would change. Like, I think he would still train like he does because that's just how he is. And I think that's what we've got to focus on, not the outcome, but how do I learn to embrace and love the challenge of trying to get better, as opposed to really attach yourself to that outcome.
And I think he's very singularly focused in a good way, in terms of that he kind of does, like, I know you guys sat down this before, I guess, the off season, and worked out a plan of what he needs to work on, and you kind of attack that one thing. It's not attacking 3, 4, 5 different things.
Absolutely.
So he does have a lot of clarity around what he needs to get better on, which helps.
Which, like, Darcy's, it would be easy for him just to run because he's such a good runner. But he's like, I'm not worried about that at all. Like, that'll just, like, I'm not worried how I go in that. I just want to get faster. I need to get stronger. I want to play, more midfield. So it's like, bang, this is what we've got to do. And then locks in. And it's not easy for him because there's things that he actually isn't natural at that he's got to really work hard on. But I think that's what he enjoys.
So we'll kind of touch on the parent side of things. So obviously they want the best for their child, like every other parent. They want to support them as much as they can and provide all the opportunities in the world. So what is their role in all of this? Well,
this is something I always tell myself as a parent, 4.5-year-old, pretty switched on kid who's always testing me. I got to keep telling myself, you're not being harsh by, drawing the line and sticking to it. I think as parents, we're being responsible. There's a difference between protecting your child from harm and keeping them safe versus protecting them from some discomfort. And I would argue that that discomfort is actually going to get them ready for the big wide world. Finishing what you start is not about perfection. It's about an identity. So when a young athlete learns that there's someone that can follow through, that they get through some hard times and then they can work through that, it starts to change everything. It builds that confidence, because for me, confidence comes from evidence, like evidence that you can do hard things. I think by protecting our kids with like the right intentions, we actually do a disservice because we take away their confidence because we do everything for them. And I've heard some child experts, things on social media, and they talk about don't give your kids the solution. Ask them questions, help them find the solution, but steer them to the answer. If we always just do everything for them, they don't build any resiliency. So I think it's also easy because saying yes avoids some conflict, and we all don't like arguing with our kids. But like I said, it removes that chance to be build that resilience, because that's how they grow. That's what helps them for whatever happens next.
And it is such a proof of concept thing, like you touched on, even if you link it to a run that you're doing. Like we always dread doing the Norwegians because they're pretty tough and challenging, but once that you've done it once, you probably don't have that excuse that you can't do it because you know that you have.
Absolutely.
So that I always find helps because you can just relate back to when you've sort of done those hard things and you've gotten through it and you're coming out the other end.
And like you got your question there, this is where I think athletic training becomes life training, because then young people build the traits that stay with them long after sport ends. Because as you said, it's learning to do hard things, it's sticking to your word, it's all that sort of stuff that actually matters most, because you've got to live inside your own head all the time. And if you start lying to yourself, telling yourself things that you don't stick to, it becomes an issue.
So if we do, pivot to the positive side of things, I know we're both kind of big on this, but what are some of the life skills that you touched on just there that training does teach these young athletes?
Big one's consistency, because training teaches the value of turning up. To be honest, most adults struggle with this, their health, their finances, their own routines, because it was never built early. It is a skill. We sort of joke a bit, but it's proven true that a lot of the adults that start with a struggle to be consistent with their training versus, say, 15-year-olds, because they just hadn't developed that skill when it was probably easier to do. And I would argue that it's never easier than when you got school routines and all this stuff sort of set for you. It is learned. So as a parent, this is massive for me, because it will impact these kids for the rest of their life. Resilience. So training exposes you to discomfort in a safe environment. So you'll face setbacks probably every training session. You'll get corrections every training session, and there'll be things like fatigue that you've got to work your way through. So you'll learn to push through instead of avoiding challenges, which I think this is, you could call this emotional resilience. So I think you just get better at how you tolerate and how you push through these challenges. Off the back of that, I think confidence is a really big thing. So like we said, that comes from the evidence that you can do hard things and that you can improve off the back of it. Whether you lift more, you run faster, you jump higher, you're moving better, you start to see your body changing. I think that that fuels a belief that those small wins repeated over time, you start to see those results. And a big one we often talk about is that impulse control and priorities and how you prioritize what really matters to you. So to improve, you need to say no to distractions, which a lot of people struggle with, athletes and adults alike. So it's one of the most important, I think, for athletes to develop, because we see money problems, we see weight problems, issues studying to get a skill or, a degree that will help people earn more money. It's a bit of a no-brainer, and yet people can't see it through. To me, that's a lot of that impulse control. So athletes learn early how to prioritize what matters if they want to be successful.
So you touched on it there, how it kind of bleeds from their teenage years into their adult years. So I know it's not just beneficial for teenagers either.
Yeah, I think parents want capable kids. We want the best for them. Young adults, they want confidence and direction, and I think athletic training gives all of that. It teaches you how to handle stress, how to problem solve, how to build a body and a mind that can handle life. Dan, one of my mentors, talks about exhaust the body, tame the mind. And that's big off. With the right mindset, you can achieve anything. So it actually starts with the physical, which then helps develop the mindset, because that's what's going to drive success the most. I reckon it was Chris Williamson and maybe, who's the big podcast? Joe Rogan or someone like that. And he got asked, no, it wasn't that, but it was someone, really well known. And they interviewed him and said, is it physical or is it mindset first? And this guy was pushing, might have been Piers Morgan, was pushing mindset. And he said, no, I actually start with the physical, because the mind will follow the physical. So if you get in the right habit, get your health right, you start working hard, overcome those obstacles, the mindset follows. And without the mindset though, nothing else matters. So it's why our messaging is evolving a little bit to talk a bit more about the adult stuff, because for me, training builds athletes, but it also builds adults.
And that's where I think I resonate with this message so much, because I attribute a lot of my, I guess, resilience and discipline to my gym stuff.
Yep.
Like even saying no and your impulse control around food, like going out, diet, all that kind of thing. So what's, I guess, one big takeaway that you want people to have from this podcast?
Understand that quitting once becomes a habit, but following through also becomes a habit. So that second one will change your life, and that's not an overstatement. Our role is to help young people develop those traits that will stay with them forever. So like we said, things like confidence, consistency, resilience, because at some point your sporting endeavours will end, but who you become through that training will last you a lifetime.